January 2020 began. At the end of January 2020, the 26th of that month to be exact, something happened. A global superstar suddenly and tragically was killed in a helicopter crash. His name was Kobe Bryant. Do you remember that? You know what that did? 9 lives were lost. But you know what that did globally? Globally. It put mortality at the forefront of everyone's minds. In a word, it put fate in front of everyone. That nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. That not a single second of your life is a guarantee. So everyone around the world was in shock. Why? Because Kobe and the likes of celebrity are often deified. He was 41 years old. Not long after that, January 26th, about a month and some change later, something else was placed at the forefront of our minds. It went from Kobe and the idea behind fate to COVID and the idea behind fear. Nobody knew what was happening in March of 2020. Immediately, everyone was told to stay home. If you were to leave your house, of course, in public settings, you were encouraged to socially distance. Of course, masks were mandated immediately. It didn't take long before they categorized businesses, essential and non-essential. And of course, the church was categorized as non-essential. And then fear was weaponized. Now, hindsight 2020 tells me that there was a 99.99% survivability rate to the virus. And the least vulnerable amongst us were children and kids. And yet and I saw a video recently of a mother trying to mask up her 8-month-old infant on a plane. And they were asked to leave the plane in disgrace as they were shamed because she couldn't get a mask to cover her baby's face. And that's just one example amongst many. Now, I'm not here to talk to you about coronavirus. I'm not here to talk about masks. I'm here to peel back the layers. And the divine irony was this: the world was wearing masks as God was unmasking the world. Didn't take long to realize, probably by Memorial Day weekend of that year, that the scientists, the experts, they weren't just wrong, they were lying all along. From the mask to the vax in 21, the only truth behind them all was they were pushed without facts. And the same people who wanted you to trust the science, they now believe a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. So what science were they pushing? Science fiction, of course. And a great delusion literally was unleashed on the world. Now, in case you're hearing what I'm not saying, to be clear, it's not about the mask. It's not about the vax. It's about the Church of Jesus Christ getting back to the Church of Acts, getting back to the mission at hand, getting back to the fact that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I said along the way that like a boa constrictor will come in, it will constrict its prey, it will squeeze. Usually the prey does not die from suffocation as we think. What happens is the blood circulation is cut off. Now, are you understanding why the church was told to stay home? That the church was deemed non-essential while marijuana dispensaries, bars, nightclubs, and big box shops were allowed to stay open? It's because the enemy was coming in with a squeeze. And he recognized, hey, not only are they going to think they're spiritually suffocating, but I'm gonna cut off their blood circulation. And the power is always in the blood. And what happens is the boa constrictor, he loosens up because he expects the prey to try to wrestle their way out of it. And all the prey is doing is getting in position for the boa constrictor to eventually coming harder. Now, what has that got to do with us today? Well, did you know that tomorrow, of all days, tomorrow, 5/27, 2024, will commence what is known as the World Health Organization's World Health Assembly. And tomorrow through this week, they will be voting on what is called the Pandemic Agreement. This so-called pandemic agreement is a blatant power grab, and the Biden administration is actually enabling it. If this agreement passes, they would grant the World Health Organization unprecedented and sweeping global powers, including the ability, get this, to dictate a sovereign nation's response with whatever the World Health Organization deems a crisis. First time in human history, aside from the Tower of Babel, that a one world entity is seeking to make decisions collectively for the planet. What makes matters worse, the powers in this agreement that grant the World Health Organization sovereignty to make determinations on behalf of nations has not even yet been entirely spelled out. No. In the agreement, as long as it's voted on and approved this week, they promise to spell out the breadth and scope of the agreement in 2026. So you give us the power now, and we'll get back to you about how we're going to use it. See, hindsight 2020. And the church was told to become compliant. And the church was told she must remain silent. Don't speak about such things, even though we have the blueprint. We have the spirit of the world as it's outlined and the spirit of the Lord. And the Lord, I believe, is calling each of us to make a determination as we're moving right along. In 2020, we were fed a narrative surrounding the death of George Floyd. You know when that was? Yesterday, 4 years ago, May 25th. That spurred on the organization known as Black Lives Matter. Of course, there were protests through the month of June, July, and August. And what I want you to see is not that Black lives don't matter. Of course Black lives matter. Of course racism is real. But racism has nothing to do with the color of skin. Racism has everything to do with the darkness of sin. And the only cure or antidote to any spiritual sin is the gospel of Jesus Christ and protesting in prayer. What they didn't want you to know, based on a several-minute clip, was that the organization Black Lives Matter was antithetical to the Bible. They were anti-family, anti-gender, anti-sexual ethics. It was Marxist-led, and the spirit behind BLM wasn't about fighting racism. They lied to us. It was about forging Marxism. It's always what happens. Marxism, whether you want to call it cultural Marxism or classical Marxism, the spirit behind Marxism, which is an ideology or a system of philosophy or governance, the spirit behind it is the spirit of the world. It's the spirit of the Antichrist. And the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. And his goal is to pit people against each other. And that is why they were tearing down statues and memorials. Think about that. Why were they doing that? Well, they were Confederate statues in the South. That's the point. They are there to remind us of our ill past and that the wickedness of slavery and racism literally spurred on a civil war where men and women died to eradicate that wicked ill from hell. Why would you want to forget about that? I'll tell you why. Because anybody in here who has a family member that is wrestling with Alzheimer's, a disease that, of course, is connected to cell connections, and cells themselves begin to degenerate and die, and eventually they lead to the devastation of memory, and even mental functions go. Memory loss is the result of Alzheimer's and the confusion that settles in. If you know a loved one that has that disease, they don't know who they are sometimes. They don't know where they've come from. Now, why would that be a tactic of the enemy? Because if a person forgets who they are, they can be taken advantage of. If a person forgets where they've come from, to erase the history of this God-provided nation is to be taken advantage of by secular and godless revisionists. See, I am convinced history not heeded is history repeated. Hindsight 2020. Cities were on fire, in my estimation, because pulpits weren't on fire. Virtue signaling was common ground, all of which led to gaslighting. What is gaslighting? It's getting people with common perception to question what they're seeing. Gaslighting always leads to a blinding. And this series of events led to the great blinding, hindsight 2020. What did we enter in 2020? The contention of election. The hostility that became more about a popularity contest or a personality contest than the Christians understanding what was at stake. You know, people were so blinded by their hate for the president that they were completely missing what was happening in the present. And you might not hear this from every pulpit, but elections have consequences. And before you try to categorize me as Republican or MAGA, this is not a statement of political endorsement. This is purely a statement that comes with a spiritual admonishment. And a true Christian cannot be placed on a political spectrum. They don't operate from right or left. They operate from up or down. It's either from heaven or if it's from hell. And there is no in between. The consequences of the election, of course, can be summarized by an event that happened on August 30th, 2021, when our military was told to withdraw from Afghanistan. It wasn't the withdrawal that was the problem. It was the fact that we left behind $7 billion of ammunition and weaponry in the hands of our enemy. Now you're going, okay, it's a military blunder. No, you're missing the spiritual implications behind it. The Lord was showing us, this is what you do when you don't occupy the ground that I would have you occupy, when you don't utilize the weapons of your spiritual warfare. Here's what you do. You give over your weaponry to the enemy, and you give up the ground that you took, and he is happily willing to occupy and take those weapons and use them against you. It was a spiritual picture. Couple that with having open borders, because elections have consequences. They say it's over 10 million unregistered, undocumented immigrants have entered through our borders, many of which are military-aged males from foreign nationals that would love to see our country destroyed. Why is the open borders an example spiritually? Think about it, church. We've not wanted God to govern us. And when you don't want God to govern you and you push him out, he gives you over to a borderless life. Sexual ethics have no borders. Our morality in our country no longer has boundaries. You can live however you want to live, as long as you claim to have your own truth. And of course, biological boundaries have gone by the wayside. Our children are the target of this demonic and perverse indoctrination. And guess what's happening in a couple months? We're going to go through it all over again. And here's what I see spiritually. It's 1776 all over again, where tyranny versus liberty is on the ballot. And yes, I will address what is called political issues, because I don't see them as political. They've actually been more moral and more biblical and more spiritual than ever before. I will address them before November. But I'm also not going to put a false read out there as a minister of the gospel. I recognize the war that we are currently in will not be won by ballots, even though I will encourage you to vote. This war that we are currently in will not be won by bullets, as some would like to believe. This war that we are currently in will only be won by biblical boldness. It will only be won by the church and the Christian being willing to stand and fight against the wiles of the devil. This war will only be won with the weapons of our warfare being mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. And strongholds are ideologies, lies, habits, lifestyles that have a strong hold on people and systems. And the only way to combat it, church, is if we go into the heavenly with the weapons of this warfare, and we pray like we've never prayed before, and we fast like we've never fasted before. You know, there's this direct blessing for Israel if they take God at his word. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, if they will pray, if they will seek my face, if they turn from their wicked way, God says, I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. That's a direct blessing for Israel. Do not take it out of its proper context and try to apply it to the United States of America. However, there are indirect blessings in the Bible. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And when you take God at his word, and his primary message for his people is to repent and return, there is a spiritual healing that comes over a people who take God at his word.